All right. Um, good evening. It's relatively late tonight, but um, yeah, today we're going to talk about safety and risk within the paradigm of my philosophy of timing. Um, a couple of things I don't think I've addressed in a formal reason about why I keep talking about philosophy of timing. The philosophy of timing, I felt, became an increasingly important topic for me to address because I felt like philosophy has never really touched on how does one how does one make decisions, or when does one switch, you could say. And there's many ways to approach this. I have no doubt that there's many books about how to make decisions and to live a better life and all these types of things. But my problem with those types of advice or um, universals is that they're not they're not exactly catered to everybody. They don't allow somebody to sort of think through or get to know or understand a, a risk and make a decision, you know. Um, so that's why I've been spending a lot of time on the philosophy of timing, um, considering and trying to shape in a way about how we can make decisions, how we can make risks without it falling into some type of universal standard of living our lives. So this particular topic, risk and safety, is something that I've been thinking about um, quite a lot because when you are trying to make a really difficult decision, a really difficult decision doesn't involve there's this risk and then there's no risk. A really difficult decision actually involves a risk and then the threat of a greater risk, which is something that we don't often see coming, or we start, or we begin to acknowledge that there's a risk and then there's the threat of a greater risk. So if I wanted to give you an example, right? This is actually an example that didn't happen to me, but it happened to somebody that I know. Um, so this is the example, right? Um, you want you have this dream of starting a business, right? Um, Drawing out the plans, trying to get support, income for the business plan, for the dream company, so to speak, that you are attempting to make and construct, and this vision that you're trying to fulfill. All of that is a well acknowledged risk that one one understands that we could fail, right? We we could easily run into debt if we don't make the right moves, or you know we we flop on a product or something like that. There's so many things that when trying to go into business, you understand that the decisions you're making have risk. Um, Now, to throw in a, to throw in the thing that I'm talking about, which poses a greater threat, a greater risk, is that not only, and in this example, this is actually something that happened in real life, not to me, but somebody I know. So somebody I know wanted to start a business, and they realized that not only did this business, wanting to start a business, create tension with themselves, but it created tension with their own family members. Um, some of the family members disagreed about them pursuing that right now. So this greater risk, right? And this person has children as well, right? Um, so that's the risk that's going on, is that the person involved is thinking about, I want to start this business. I want to dedicate my dream, my vision to that um, sort of understanding. And what ends up happening is that the greater risk manifests in terms of threatening the relationships that will result from pursuing that very dream or vision. So now you have a difficult decision to make in terms of, do you pursue a your vision, your business, knowing that not only you risk the possibility of flopping the business, of not being successful with this vision, but you also risk potentially ruining the very relations that you have with your wife and your children. Um, so in this case, right, and this is something that I had to really think about in terms of like trying to sort of work my way through this example, and something that was actually occurring, um, in my friend's life. Um, and one thing that we had to ask ourselves was, okay, what do you value? What do you value more in this case? What is an absolute priority? What is the sort of like unconditional thing that cannot be given up, cannot be threatened in this case? Um, and that person said family. Okay. So once we understood that it was family for them, then we had to work around. And I said something along the lines of, it's difficult to make decisions when you're threatened by another risk. But it's easier to take a risk if, and only if, those that are in relationship to you offer some type of safety for you to take a risk. What do I mean by that? Well, what I'm trying to say is that if you don't have people supporting you in this dream, or in this vision in some type of way, um, it becomes difficult, because what ends up happening if you don't have that support is that you threaten the very relationships that could help you or could, sort of cushion your fall, so to speak. Um, so basically, what I'm trying to say is that risk should only be contained within the very, um, how can I describe this? It should only be contained within the very striving towards that goal. I know that's ambiguous. What do I mean? I'm talking about that the risk should only be contained within that business manners, right? The business matters, not manners, but yeah, manners, fine. Um, the risk should be contained within business matters. That means if I pursue a business and I go for my vision, the risk shouldn't be me losing my family, me possibly threatening my own relationships with my own family. The risk shouldn't be within that container. The risk should be always within the container of which I am striving for, right? Building a business, making success from that. What are those risks? Well, those risks should always potentially be, the flopping of a product that you're trying to sell, or maybe you go in debt because you haven't been successful with this business, right? But that's a risk we all understand, and we're willing to take that risk because we want, this business to come true, this business to become alive. The risk that we don't want, that doesn't help us take a risk, is the very threat of the relationships that should be able to support us, basically. Um, Now I know this example is complicated because there's a lot of nuances to this argument, like, my family doesn't support me, so what does it matter? Given the context of this example, we have to understand that what I'm trying to get at with risk and safety is that risk should always be within a container of the very desire that we are trying to satisfy. Um, it should never involve a sort of accidental um, risk, because that accidental risk, what ends up happening is that accidental risk actually becomes the greater risk, um, for which it can hinder you from taking the genuine risk that you want to take, which is, um, making your own business, starting your own business. And and so hopefully with this example, and obviously there's a lot of arguments for this, but basically what I'm trying to say is that essentially safety and risk occur in the same setting, if that makes any sense. I think it was Adam Phillips who said something like, a child is willing to play on his own as long as he knows that his parents are watching him, as long as he feels that his parents are watching over him playing, as long as the child is cognizant that his parents have eyes over him while he's playing, then the child feels essentially safe to take any risk. But once the child notices that the parents are no longer paying attention to him, as Adam Phillips says, they sort of feel stunted. They feel shocked, right? They start wanting that attention. They feel very insecure in that moment. So I think Adam Phillips' example of the way a child sort of feels safe, as long as he sort of has this sort of like background safety net to continue to take a risk and play with his toys and go on adventures in his in his imagination. Um, as long as he feels that, as long as he has some type of background of safety in that sense, then he is capable. And if I really wanted to give a more personal story about myself, um, I can talk about why I chose to finally become a religious studies major. So why did I do that? Well, actually, funny enough, I actually couldn't make that decision on my own. Um, Even though I wanted to, I absolutely wanted to make that decision. Um, but I kept, you could say, I kept outthinking myself, or I over rationalized my decision. I kept succumbing to sort of like the utilitarian notions of, why I should even bother getting this degree or going for this major. And that constantly sort of haunted me, right? I didn't know what to do. I was sort of torn. I really genuinely wanted to become a religious studies major, um, but then I couldn't reconcile the fact that there was this sort of utilitarian threat of, not possibly finding a job, not finding anything. Um, it wasn't until um, my my two best friends, they had actually speculated a solution for me. They said, "I know you really want to be a religious studies major, and I think you should be." And we came up with a solution. They said, "You could become a chaplain in the army, right? That makes use of your degree." Um, Now, of course, when I heard that, that wasn't necessarily ideal. I wasn't exactly fascinated with the idea of joining the army again for, after I just got out, um, to go back in as like a sort of army chaplain, um, as a sort of like army preacher, but it's not really a preacher because it's a chaplain. You're just more of like a spiritual presence for the soldiers. But so once I heard that, I said, okay, yeah, I felt much more confident to make that decision. Um, but now, what's funny about this example of mine is that on the surface of it, it actually seems as if there's no risk because there's a sort of safety plan, right? Um, that I could just become a chaplain, and that be sort of like, you know, the best outcome, or if there is nothing that I can find, then that's the outcome that will always be there, the option that is always present for me to take if I want to utilize my degree, right? um, that's the surface level of that sort of understanding, in my opinion. um, what allowed me to take that risk, actually, even though that option is presented to me, I don't have to take that option. But it wasn't until one of my friends say, hey, you know even if you do flop, right? Even if you can't find anything with your degree, even if you can't even use your degree, he's like, he said something like, you know, we got you. We'll help you out, you know. Um, and I genuinely believe that. You know, I genuinely believe that. But that's when I realized that in order for me to take a genuine risk, I needed I needed that sort of, I- you could say, support system. And I think we all need that sort of support system. But I don't want to define support system as like, oh, people that you have and so on. But um, the main point is that oftentimes you can't genuinely take a risk unless you have some type of safety, some type of safety to which you can propel yourself into a risk. And if you think about even like baby birds, you know, um, there's a reason why a baby bird doesn't just, just gets pushed off the nest, right? Um, the mother understands that the baby bird has to at least be able to grow some wings first and mature a little bit. And so the mother is, basically provides them safety, nourishment, um, to which then eventually they get pushed off to take a risk, to take a risk into a real life and fly in the real world. Um, and funny enough, I actually think, now that I consider more between safety and risk, I begin to think more about how Maslow was perhaps spot on, um, with the notions that there has to be certain requirements met in order for us to actually take a risk. Um, because if I actually think about it, if I didn't have my friends sort of convincing me of this unconditional, like, it's okay if you fail, right? It's okay if you fail because we have you, right? We got you covered. We got your back on this, right? It's okay if you fail. It's that very idea, that very sort of support that, in my opinion, sort of allows us to actually take a risk. Um, it's very difficult, in my opinion, to take a risk, and I would have to find somebody to prove me otherwise. But I think for most people, it's very difficult to take a risk if the people that you are in relationship with don't support you to take that risk. It, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to have dreams, have aspirations, if your significant other or your family or your friends or whoever it may be is not behind you in that decision, is not willing to sort of, you know, uh, guide you or just to be there. Really, I mean that's really the main thing. If I would say being there is the essential point of the safety, is that being there. If there isn't any safety there, then how can I really take a risk? Because if there isn't safety, what you're encountering in this is not just a risk. What you're encountering is a risk and then a greater risk, meaning that if you decide to pursue whatever you want to do, right, become famous in Hollywood, right, at the price of what? At the price of possibly, threatening all your previous relationships, right? You know, now you have two things, right? You're trying to juggle between two risks, right? You say either I take this job or I lose all my friends, my family, or I damage those relationships. In my opinion, these are the dichotomies that we should avoid because a risk should only be within the container of which you are desiring to pursue. Meaning that if you wish to become a model or a famous movie star, the risk should be always contained within that factor. Meaning that the risk should be that actually you don't become a model, you don't become famous, you don't become anything of any influential stature, right? That should be the risk. But the risk shouldn't be that you damage, lose the other things like your family or your relationships in that case. Now, someone could argue, well, isn't it the case that if you become famous, that you damage your relationships? Yeah, absolutely. Um, but that's only if that's only if you never actually had their support in the first place. um, Now, of course, you can always risk that the moment you become famous. That's always possible. I mean, because after that, I mean, that's always the potential risk. And that's when we have to choose between that point. But again, my main point is that we can we can never confidently take a risk. And I know for some people that may sound weird. It's like, well, isn't risk supposed to be like, kind of like, we're just going to see what happens. Yeah, it should be like that, but it shouldn't be at the cost of a greater risk. I think that's what I've been trying to say this whole time. It should never be at a cost of a greater risk. And the greater risk can always be the thing that actually gives you safety, whether that be your family, your friends, your coworkers. Um, that is what, as long as we have that, in my opinion, that sort of safety, then we are capable of taking risks, right? Because if let's say I have a partner, right, and I say, look, I want to be a movie star, whatever, and we talk it out with each other and we say, okay, look, I know that maybe me getting arrogant is a possibility, that's a risk. How do you feel about that? You're talking to your partner about this, and she's like, okay, well, you know I will we will take precautions as such, right? Now, this is like your partner supporting you in this case, right? You're coming up with things together to sort of um, say control the risks, control the possibility of those greater risks. Because becoming famous, becoming influential, always carries the risk of threatening your current relations with people and family and everything else. It always contains that greater risk. But if they already support you in this, then that's something that you can feel more confident going into. Um, but if it's not something like that, then then I guess the greater risk is that you have to boil down and choose who do you, who or what do you value more? And there's always something that you value more. And I can guarantee you, most of the time, unless you have already bad relations with your family and friends or with any type of support, um, most of the time you are probably not going to be willing to take that risk of, becoming a movie star or starting a business or doing anything of that nature, because losing those relations end up becoming or posing a greater risk and threat that possibly shrinks you from even beginning or wanting to take that genuine risk of wanting to become or start a business or become, movie star. Um, and the funny thing is we see this in relationships all the time. Because oftentimes we talk about risks like as if risks don't involve subjective relations, right? It's not, I would say most of the time it's not about, me taking a risk and like it's just me, maybe if I'm like climbing a mountain or something, I understand that there's a risk and, okay, I'm willing to take that risk. But most of the time with our deep and personal relationships, especially when it comes to our dreams and ambitions, when we're trying to share that with each other, with our significant others, even, um, the risk is always presented in the case of if you pursue this the wrong way, your ambition, you not only possibly lose out on your ambition, but you also lose out on the very relationship that you have with your significant other or your friends or your family. So if you can find some way, some type of solution, some type of agreement, some type of compromise, um, to which you can feel stable in this relationship, so you can then pursue something unstable, right? To pursue something that is risky, knowing that even if I fail, right? Me, my significant other, my family, my friends, we understood this was the risk. We decided to do this together. Um, so I guess what I am now that I've talked this out a little bit more, I guess what I've really been trying to say is that most of our decisions are not always necessarily an individual subjective risk, but a lot of our big ambitions, probably one of the most difficult decisions in our life that we decide to take, it becomes a communal risk. And the thing that I am trying to say is that you can never risk the communal. You can never risk it. Because the moment you threaten both, well, I want to say in my experience, it's not worth it. And I think we've seen this a lot of times with a lot of things. Um, I think, was it Rodin? Auguste Rodin, famous sculptor? Because I remember reading a biography about him and Rilke. Um, Rodin risked everything for his dream to become a sculptor. Um, but by but by the end of his biography, I can't help but feel that even though he was a successful artist um, in every way possible, um, he threatened every relationship that he had, basically, even Rilke's, even Rilke's. And what gets sad towards the end of his life is that he starts mistaking his statues for real people. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's the price of a dream to pursue this. It's the price of our dreams. But I've always disagreed on that understanding. Um, I don't think that should be the price. I think if you don't have the support to pursue that, um, then you have a couple of options, meaning that if you go just full on, you send it, you go straight for your dreams and your ambitions, then you must obviously be aware of the fact that you risk losing not only your relationships, but also possibly never becoming the very thing or pursuing, the thing that you want and desire in your dream. Um, and even then, you have to ask yourself, am I really going to be satisfied even if I succeed in fulfilling my dream if I have nobody there with me? um, because we are deeply communal creatures, and I think we have to understand that risk is communal. It's not a matter of an individualistic choice. You can only properly make an individualistic risk if you have the sort of communal safety behind you. Um, you know, and you don't have to have support like in a financial sense or anything. I mean, if as long as your friends, your family, your anybody has some type of faith, some type of belief that you can, and even if you can't, um, it's just the presence of being there that they allow you to take a risk. Because what happens is that we become all involved. We're all taking a risk, even by just supporting you, whether it be by being there, whether it be by financial reason. We're all taking a risk together in this case. But I feel like it must be the case that risk is communal, deeply communal. I don't see, I don't quite see out of that sort of communal relations when we decide to take risk. I don't see it. Um, I think parents and having children is probably the most apparent difficulty in making decisions, because what a parent has to come across is that they meet this trouble with, if I spend too much time at work, if I dedicate too much time, then I risk damaging my relationship with not only my significant other but my own children. But if you're somehow capable of making your significant other and your children get sort of behind your ambition or understand why you have such an ambition, um, it makes it easier to take that risk. Pursue the possibility of that failure without damaging or risking um, losing something greater in this case. Because I do often think that we don't, when we're talking about risk, we don't often think about the intersubjective relations that we are involved in our decisions. We're always thinking about, some individualistic choice, like, if I just, if I drive fast, and if I drive fast on the speedway and I, end up, basically resulting in death because of my risk of speeding on the highway, then, that's the risk I take. you know. But you see that is a sort of a blindsided understanding of your own risk. It's not just the risk of you possibly ending your life because you're speeding in the road, but it's the risk that you also end somebody else's life that you had no intent on taking, even though you were fully well and okay with risking your own life in this case. But you see how deeply communal that is. You see how complicated, how difficult that becomes when trying to make a decision. Because it's never just one risk. It's always the threat of a greater risk. But that looming threat of a greater risk it always haunts us. It always prevents us from taking that genuine risk of pursuing our ambitions, of pursuing our dreams. And you have to ask yourself in a very honest way, will I be satisfied if I'm there alone? Only time can tell. But if I was a betting man, I would say no. I would say no, you would not be. You would not be satisfied. Because almost every risk is a deeply communal risk, in my opinion. But all right, that's I think that's enough for today. I think I talked what I need to talk about. But all right, I will talk to you guys later. Hope you guys enjoyed. All right.